Hi everyone. My name is Sha. Hey guys. Hey everyone. Thank you so much to Maureen and Peter for having me out today. This is my first time in Burlington. It's been beautiful so far. It's awesome. It's been really wonderful to kind of walk around and relax. And today's also just been so dense with lessons to bring back to work. It's really amazing to kind of be here today. It's also, it's also freaked me out a little bit about, how to possibly have anything interesting enough to say to be the only person standing between 150 people and beer. Please be gentle. Talking with Jeff last night, I said everything's kinder with a GIF, so here you go. I'm not going to try to teach you anything new this afternoon. I'm just going to try and wander a little bit around the work I've been doing. I have 2 slides in here that might be epilepsy triggers, marking when they're coming up with the white box in the center, in the corner. This is what I've been working on over the last 10 years. It's nice just to kind of get it all out of the way. My background is in architecture. I studied and worked in San Francisco and then in New York. But I quickly left to work in motion graphics and then later in data visualization. I worked for a couple of years at a design firm in San Francisco called Stamen before accidentally running through some sort of Silicon Valley checklist, starting a startup, going through Y Combinator, getting acquired, and going through an IPO. In 2013, I left tech entirely, ditched San Francisco for Brooklyn, went full hipster, and focused my time on 2 artisanal on-demand product companies, Gifpop and Meshu. I had this thought sometime in 2013 that I'd never work on another tech project ever again. But by the end of the year, I'd gotten pulled in on a project to redesign Healthcare.gov, where I've been working ever since. All of this is to say that this is in no way a career. This gift just keeps on giving. This is in no way a career. To weave some sort of narrative thread through this would be to try and retcon structure from circumstance, intention from intuition. And though I'm going to be talking about Healthcare.gov, this talk is not really about me at all, even though I'm the one up here. There have been far too many people involved in the construction and maintenance of the website, and even then, that's just the last mile. There are advocates, politicians, journalists, call center representatives who do much, much harder work. That's always sort of the paradox of events like this. What I'd like to focus on today is the tension I've been working with between designing for the pace of fashion versus designing for the pace of infrastructure. And when I say fashion and infrastructure here, I mean in the sense of the shearing layers that the architect Frank Duffy coined and Stuart Brand popularized in the 70s. Rates of change of various layers. Fashion moves incredibly fast, quotes itself, constantly transforms. Infrastructure, on the other hand, moves slowly, requires layers and layers of foundation. It's also about scale, about storytelling and systems, about the making of myths and the origins of what sometimes feel like magic. Storytelling, of course, is how we communicate, how we've carried history and culture forward through centuries. Stories have heroes, conflicts, resolutions. Stories have clear beginnings and neat endings, have authors and narrative structures and tropes. In film, people talk a lot about the hero's journey, that story arc that drives most mainstream movies today. In politics and advocacy groups, cause-based storytelling, there's what my friend Parker Mitchell likes to refer to as the founder's story, which often has the politician or advocate tell their own personal history, how it intersects with the cause that they're fighting for. And there's this amazing moment that happens often in these sorts of speeches, these sorts of pitches. Some of you may have experienced this, where they'll kind of turn to you with their proposal and say, you know, imagine if we could just save one life, then it'd all be worth it. It's a powerful phrase. It's one that asks you to ignore scale and focus on the value of a single life. There's a sacredness here that gives arguments weight. How could you argue for not wanting to save a single life? I hate that phrase. As humans, we choose narratives over complexity. When we work online these days, when we work at the scale of infrastructure, we are working on systems. Systems are a bit harder to hold. Infrastructure runs deep, moves slowly. Last summer, I was lucky enough to be on this container ship to take a break from everything. It was part of an expedition led by Kate Davies and Liam Young, a couple gonzo architects from London. Our goal was to trace the supply chains that we so desperately depend on these days, to examine the infrastructure and systems that support us. We sailed from Saigon to Hong Kong on this ship, the Gunhilde Maersk, a ship almost the size of the Empire State Building that held hundreds of thousands of tons of cargo, that had a crew all told of 15. And what I kept thinking about on this trip was how little the crew had control over what was going on. Schedules were planned, loading and unloading schedule sequences were transmitted to the ship. The captain and engineers had very little input. It made me think about self-driving cars, that sort of unspoken fear that we have with them. Not that they won't be safe, but that when something goes wrong, there won't be a person to blame. Only a system or an algorithm. That the captain is on this ship, that the pilot is on the airplane, in some way to just be a symbolic sacrifice, a totem of our involvement in a system we don't fully have a grasp on. When systems fail, what do we do? Who do we blame? How do we respond? This is where the story of Healthcare.gov begins. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was signed into law in 2010. It represented a lot of things to a lot of people, but perhaps the best way to capture it is through what Joe Biden whispers to Barack Obama right here. He says, "This is a big fucking deal." As you're all well aware of, in Vermont, healthcare is an insane thing in this country. Almost 50 million Americans were uninsured in 2010. and anywhere between 25,000 and 50,000 Americans die prematurely every year because of not having health insurance. According to various studies, not having health insurance in this country increases your chances of dying prematurely 25 to 40%. And whether or not you agreed with the law, it was a huge change. And one of the major components written right into the language were many references to an internet website, which became Healthcare.gov. And yeah, and in 2013, and in October 2013, the healthcare exchange on Healthcare.gov launched. News crews, I mean, by the way, I just love, they have no idea how to film websites. Yeah. The website failed. And initially, people thought that the website was broken because of an overwhelming response, because there was one. But slowly, over the course of the month, people inside and out began to realize that the problems that the website was facing were not just because of demand, but because of massive structural failures in terms of internal architecture, in terms of design, and in terms of organizational incompetence. By the end of October, Obama had tapped Todd Park, then the White House CTO, to lead the charge for what was called a tech surge, pulling people from the tech industry in to help fix the website. It is in these sorts of moments that stories become bigger than themselves, where myth-making starts to happen. The tech surge sounds military, evokes explosions, but this was a quiet war, fought in meetings and code. And though there have been many stories now about the tech team, I want to talk about the experience as a whole, what it has felt like, what we've tried to learn. For the end of 2013 and for most of 2014, I've been back and forth between a hotel in Columbia, Maryland, and home in New York, working with some of the most hardworking, compassionate engineers I've ever met. The tech surge, in the end, is people. People like Mikey Dickerson or Lindsay Tyson, site reliability engineers from Google, people who put their lives on hold to do what many thought was stupid or impossible, people who left loved ones, jobs, and homes to come together in that cold winter. And it was hard. People burnt out, worked themselves raw. Todd Park slept in the office, worked harder than anyone. And despite the talent in the rooms, there were no egos, no shouting matches. There were no heroes here. We just worked. And we have kept working. Conference rooms, hotels, cafes, and restaurants. This is Randy on New Year's Eve. And we've shared so many meals and spent so much time together at this point that it feels a little bit like family. We've learned a lot as a family. It is hard to imagine how this is possible now, but over 1 million people went to Healthcare.gov on that first day, and only 6 were able to sign up. There were failures at every possible level. This wasn't just about the technical failures or the design failures. It was structural, systematic failures for some of the people that needed the most care. It makes me think of William Redner, a retired special agent who wrote about his policing career in Los Angeles the bank robbery capital of the world. He pointed out that basically, what else would you expect with an immense city crisscrossed with highways and banks located near exit ramps? That there is a kind of crime that an infrastructure asks for. That there were 55 government contractors working on different fragments of Healthcare.gov without anyone in a lead role. That almost $1 billion was spent building the website without testing for scalability or without hooking up monitoring systems. And these structural failures extended to the design as well. The Healthcare.gov application form itself was almost 80 pages, a monster of a form for something that only required basic address and income information to verify eligibility. And Jake Solomon, while at Code for America, said this about a different government application process, but he said that the small failures and frictions in design weren't just unfortunate, they were abusive. In the social sciences, these are microaggressions, unintended discriminations that come out due to systematic biases or blind spots. And it is easy to encounter these systematic failures and systematic abuses and build resentment or disgust, to sneer rather than listen. We're designers. We like clean slates, work we can stand behind. But what we've held on to, what's kind of kept us together, is never assuming malice. So much more for us can be explained by inattention or fear. And to borrow a phrase from the systems thinker Donella Meadows, we've found leverage points, ways to intervene in the system. We've found a methodology and culture that we've been able to enact that relies on strengths that we brought from our own individual experiences. For us, as designers and engineers, our best point of leverage has been our ability to build. Because everyone brought in was technical, it was easier for us to make prototypes and test with real people than draft long proposals or write long requirements documents. It highlighted for us the material constraints of code versus law. How many people in the government understood software to be as expensive to amend as law. Emphasizing action for us allowed us to run A/B tests, monitor site usage, prevented us from flying blind. And defaulting to action also allowed us to appeal to the laziness of many government contractors. By building an internal style guide as live HTML and CSS, already optimized for mobile, we made it easier for government contractors to copy our own work than to write their own, which brought consistency to the various fragmented portions of the website. It wasn't flashy or sexy, but it was coherent. And we were able to unify forms and pages across the site this way. At the layer of the organization, our best point of leverage has been to over-communicate. In a culture where the people who understood the requirements of the law never directly contacted the engineers and designers who ultimately implemented the healthcare exchange, talking to people directly cut through fog on both sides. Jeannie Kim, the woman who recruited myself and many others, would often find a person's office in a government building and just sit there and wait until they got back from whatever meetings they were in for the day. David Chang, who's now helping at the Department of Veterans Affairs, would often fix bugs or copy or content on the website during meetings with everyone gathered around. These acts, for us, collapsed the distance between the people in the government and the website that they were responsible for. It's been amazing to be able to teach people more about the design and construction of these systems and watch them become more brave in their own abilities to make things better. And it has been so valuable to be in a constant contact with the people that know the law, because healthcare is so incredibly complex. We found that for most people visiting Healthcare.gov, many of the questions were unnecessary. The old website fought complexity of the law with the sort of complexity of the interface. But we worked with people in the government to cut out as many extraneous questions as we could. In the end, we ended up making the application process 80% shorter for most people. When Ryan, one of the White House aides, was going to present the new application to the president and vice president, he ended up abandoning his PowerPoint presentation, his whole kind of prepared deck, and just filling out the application form in front of them, because it was faster to demo the website than to make a presentation. At the end of the demo, the response was, "That's it?" And together, somehow, we got here. At the end of the first open enrollment period last year, Mikey came back, Todd Park manned the war room. And since that first day where only 6 people were able to sign up, the number of uninsured Americans has dropped about a third, from 18% of the country uninsured in 2013 to about 12 at the beginning of this year. And the new application we built is cleaner and simpler, which pleases the designer in me, but the real power has been in the numbers. The new application converts 40% more people than the old one in half the time. And the new login system that we just launched a few months ago now saves the government $70 million a year. These are not just, cute case studies. These are people's lives. This is our money. And this phrase came up a couple times where people talked to us and said what we were doing was like magic. But I hate that phrase also. We didn't do any magic in this work. What we did was the fucking basics. That, to me, has been the wildest thing about all of this. That what our team brought into the government was nothing unique at all. Nothing that any of us in this room doesn't already have. A sense of empathy, a level of respect, a pride in our work and our craft. For most startups and many companies and firms in general, building online means speed and scale. But it also means a constant negotiation between the user experience and cost. All of this is fine if we continue to think of ourselves as building in an ecosystem of fashion, that everything is supposed to be constantly transforming. That's not true anymore. Products that designers like us touch every day exist at the scale of infrastructure. It's easy and understandable to forget this when we're lost in code, when we're lost in our wireframes, whether we have 1,000 users or 1 billion. But because of this distance, we end up with cases like Facebook, where a casual test on 0.05% of users meant manipulating the emotions of over 600,000 people. That's 16 Burlingtons. In these cases, instead of the problem of the sacredness of the individual, we see the inability to feel the weight of one at all. And while startups can afford to ignore whole swaths of people at their own risk, at their own loss. The power and responsibility of our government is that it can't. We work constantly on Spanish translation. We spent a lot of time last year going through the website with our eyes closed, testing our work with screen readers. This is stuff that I carry with me now. Think about this project and I get overwhelmed. It has permanently changed me. We talk a lot about building tools for ourselves, about scratching our own itches, but I find it hard to get excited about that these days. Our struggles are easy. Where to eat, what bus to take. For us, our team, we've found that the higher up that we are on the hierarchy of needs, the lower we need to look, because there's much more work to do. And so our team is now forming a public benefit corporation called NAVA to help other agencies at the federal level improve their services. We're working and hoping to create more avenues, more paths to do this sort of work, and we're in good company. For a few years now, Code for America has been offering year-long fellowships for designers and engineers to work with cities, designing tools and services that help real people. On the government side, the newly established 18F organization is now building out their team under the General Services Administration, working on projects to improve security on government services. And last summer, Mikey Dickerson officially left Google to head the United States Digital Service at the OMB, literally writing the strategies and playbooks that will change the way the government builds digital services. I think about all the work that Mikey has done this past year, and it still doesn't really feel real. None of it does. It all has been sort of not unlike a dream, waking up over and over in different rooms in the same hotel, working in this surreal environment alongside these incredible people. I'm going to end on this image, not because I'm there, but because I can see you there too. Because ultimately, it's not about Mikey or me or any of us. There's no ending here, no neat story arc. It's about this immense power we have as designers and engineers today. It's about being able to work on systems too complex to hold, numbers too big to understand, for families we'll never meet, for people we'll never know. Because if we could just save one life, that would not be enough. That would not be enough by far.